Okay, let's unpack this. Picture the Confederacy, deep in the throes of the Civil War. The Union Navy's rolling out its Anaconda plan.
Right, that strategy designed to just slowly squeeze the life out of the South. Blockading the ports was key.
Absolutely key. Think about Charleston, Mobile. These weren't just cities, they were lifelines. Supplies, trade, everything depended on them. And suddenly they're being choked off.
Exactly. The economy's just reeling, right? Resources are getting thin on the ground, and you can feel this, well, this desperation starting to set in.
And imagine seeing those federal warships just sitting out there offshore every single day. A constant visible reminder of the pressure, the isolation.
Yeah, it's a vulnerability they can't ignore. The pressure is immense.
So in this atmosphere, this intense pressure cooker, a really revolutionary idea starts to surface.
And it's audacious, isn't it? It's completely unconventional. Something almost out of, I don't know, science fiction for the 1860s.
It really was. But what if this idea, this gamble, didn't come through the usual military channels? What if it was actually born and kind of nurtured within the bonds of a secret brotherhood?
That's the fascinating angle here.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into this incredible intersection of history. You've got the Civil War context, the absolute dawn of submarine tech, and this significant, often overlooked, role played by Freemasonry.
And we're basing this deep dive specifically on the sources you shared with us, those excerpts titled The Brotherhood's Secret Weapon, a Masonic Marvel of the Civil War.
Right. And our mission today is really to unpack what these sources tell us. We want to go beyond just the sub-specs or, what happened to it in the end.
We're looking at the how and the why.
Exactly. The story of the H.L. Hunley submarine and the absolutely crucial role Masons played, from the initial idea, getting the money together, through the difficult development, those awful trials.
All the way to that final fateful mission.
It's a story of innovation driven by pure necessity, really, but powered by this network, bound by something more than just, military goals. Let's really dig into this.
So like you said, that backdrop is just critical. If we rewind to late 1861, early 1862, the Confederacy is in serious trouble.
Deep trouble. That Union naval blockade, the Anaconda plan,
Yeah.
it was working. It was incredibly effective.
Think about those major ports, Charleston, Mobile, New Orleans, before it fell. These were the South's gateways to the world.
Their connection for exporting cotton, which was, the whole economy, basically.
Right, and for importing everything else, weapons, manufactured goods, even food sometimes. Things the South just couldn't make enough of itself, especially during wartime.
So those federal warships sitting offshore,
Yeah.
that wasn't just for show.
No, not at all. It was economic strangulation, strategic strangulation. The sources really paint this picture of a South getting more and more isolated, resources dwindling, facing a crisis that, frankly, their conventional military tactics just weren't solving.
It screamed for something radical, some kind of disruption.
Exactly. And that's where this revolutionary idea starts to emerge. It wasn't about building a bigger battleship or a faster gunboat.
No, it was about going under the waves, going unseen. The sources call it audacious, revolutionary, almost fictional.
That comparison they make to Jules Verne is so telling, isn't it? Because back then, a working submarine that could actually fight, that was pure theory, almost fantasy.
Yeah, naval warfare was surface warfare, period.
Yeah.
For centuries.
So the idea of a boat deliberately sinking itself, moving underwater, then popping up to strike, it was just alien to how military minds thought back then.
It required a huge leap of faith and a willingness to pour resources into something totally unproven, incredibly risky.
Which brings us to that unique perspective in our sources. This wasn't, initially at least, some official Confederate government project.
No, according to the material we're looking at, this whole concept started taking shape in late 1861, not in government offices or military HQs.
But in the dimly lit back rooms of Masonic lodges across the South.
That's what's so striking. It starts with this network of private citizens, men who were Masons, deeply worried about the Confederacy and motivated to help however they could, using their brains, their money, their connections.
They were looking for solutions outside the official channels, which could be slow and bureaucratic.
And the sources really highlight the mix of people involved, which I found fascinating.
Yeah.
They weren't all soldiers or shipbuilders.
No, the material mentions diverse talents and backgrounds, people from all sorts of jobs, different walks of life.
But the glue was that Masonic connection. Those sacred oaths they'd taken, the shared values, brotherhood, helping each other out, a belief in progress, applying knowledge.
It created this pre-existing network of trust. fertile ground for a radical idea like this to be discussed, seriously considered, and kept secret.
Which brings us right to the main man, the one credited with really formalizing this idea, Horace Lawson Hunley.
Right. The sources identify him as a prominent lawyer in New Orleans. Successful, respected.
But not just a lawyer. Critically, he was also the secretary of Mount Moriah Lodge, No. 59 there in New Orleans.
So his involvement wasn't just casual. He was deeply embedded in that Masonic community.
And the source says his vision for this underwater weapon came directly from watching those Union blockaders, late 1861, seeing them suffocate his city, his state.
Yeah, he dreamed up this radical idea, an underwater boat that could take out these surface ships. The sources describe it pretty vividly, don't they? A weapon striking with the invisible might of Poseidon himself.
That language is amazing. Poseidon, an unseen force, smiting ships out of nowhere, like an act of God.
It really drives home how absolutely unprecedented, almost unbelievable this must have sounded at the time. Not just tweaking naval warfare, but turning it completely on its head.
To incredible imagination and courage, frankly, to even think it seriously.
And yet, Hunley wasn't just daydreaming. The sources are clear. His lodge nurtured this vision. Early 1862, he takes this wild idea and turns it into what they call, using Masonic terms, a piece of architecture.
Basically a formal plan, a proposal.
Exactly. And he presents this detailed proposal to his brothers at Mount Moriah Lodge No. 59.
And incredibly, they bought it. The lodge members, despite how fantastical it must have seemed, they saw the potential. They understood the need.
That initial buy-in from his trusted Masonic circle was absolutely the first critical step. Without that, it might have just died right there.
So, right after that presentation, the serious discussions start. And the sources stress, these talks were bound by those sacred oaths and the inherent discretion Masonry holds dear.
Secrecy was paramount, absolutely essential. You couldn't have the Union finding out about this potential game changer.
But they were also realists. They had the vision, they had the secrecy, but the lodge members knew.
They didn't have the cash or all the expertise needed. Not within just one lodge, even a prominent one like Mount Moriah.
Right, so while keeping it super hush-hush, they started reaching out, discreetly contacting other lodges, tapping into that wider network to find more help, more funding.
And this is where you really see the power of that broader Masonic network kick in, just like the sources describe. The project needed more than one lodge could offer money, specialized skills.
So the word starts spreading, quietly, through the fraternity.
How they did it is fascinating. Whispered conversations in lodge rooms, the sources say. Coded messages using Masonic ciphers passed between brothers.
Wow, coded messages. It sounds like something out of a spy novel.
It practically was a kind of underground network operating beneath the surface, all driven by this shared goal and mutual trust. And it worked. Support started to filter in from different places.
Connecting people across state lines, right?
Exactly. That geographical reach was a unique strength. It wasn't constrained by military commands or state borders. It was person to person, built on those shared values. So by spring 1862, you get James McClintock involved.
Okay, who was he?
A skilled engineer. From Mobile Lodge No. 40 in Alabama. He brought the technical know-how, and the source points out that deep trust and understanding found in their shared Masonic values was vital for collaborating on something this secret, this sensitive.
Makes total sense. You couldn't just put an ad in the paper, secret submarine builders wanted. Trust was everything.
Absolutely paramount. And funding something this speculative, especially when the Confederate government itself was, let's say, hesitant about unproven tech, that was a huge hurdle.
So where did the money come from?
Well, this is where Dr. John R. Fretwell and Edgar Singer enter the picture, according to the sources, summer of 1862. These two guys, they're members of Lavaca Lodge No. 36.
Wait, Lavaca Lodge, where's that?
Texas. All the way out in Texas, far from New Orleans or Mobile, but they caught wind of the project through the Masonic grapevine.
Texas. That really shows you the reach of this network. Incredible.
And the source is clear. Fretwell and Singer provided immense and crucial financial backing. This wasn't pocket change. It was serious investment. And their motivation, explicitly tied to their Masonic duty to aid a brother in need.
That's powerful. Oaths turning into real, tangible support for this crazy ambitious project.
And Edgar Singer, apparently a relative of the sewing machine guy, he brought more than just money.
Oh, yeah. What else?
Expertise in torpedo design. The sources mention his work with something called the Singer Secret Service Corps. So he knew about explosives, underwater charges, practical knowledge that was absolutely critical as they moved from just an idea to actually engineering a weapon.
Okay, so you've got Hunley, The visionary lawyer from New Orleans, McClintock, the engineer from Mobile, now Fretwell and Singer bringing money and torpedo know-how from Texas, all connected by the Masons.
It's an amazing convergence of skills and resources, all channeled through that network.
And the team kept growing.
It did. Fall of 1862, William Alexander joins up. He's a British-born mechanical engineer, also from Mobile Lodge No. 40, like McClintock.
Another engineer. What did he bring?
An international perspective, maybe? But the source highlights his experience with old-world engineering techniques, which apparently turned out to be really important for solving some tricky mechanical problems later on.
What a lineup. It really hammers home the source's point, doesn't it? That a huge strength of the fraternity here was its ability to find the right people, connect them, and bring together all these diverse talents for one incredibly difficult goal.
It wasn't just shared ideals, it was pooling practical knowledge, money, and maybe most importantly, that underlying trust to tackle something that must have seemed almost impossible.
Okay, so they've assembled this Masonic dream team, more or less. Now they actually have to build the thing.
Right. And this wasn't a smooth process. It was intense trial and error, really pushing the limits of what technology could do back then. It led to them building 3 different submarines.
3. Okay, let's walk through them. The first one was the Pioneer.
The Pioneer, yeah.
Yeah.
Started in New Orleans, late 1861, ready for testing early 62.
And this was the first attempt, so
Yeah.
probably pretty basic.
Very much the proof of concept. The source calls it crude by modern standards. Basically an iron cylinder, pointy ends, hand-cranked propeller. Simple stuff.
Did it work?
It showed promise. Tests in Lake Pontchartrain were encouraging enough. It proved the basic idea could work.
But it never saw action.
No. New Orleans fell to the Union in April 1862, and they couldn't let the enemy get their hands on it, so Hunley and the team had to scuttle the Pioneer, sink it themselves.
Tough break. So they lost their first prototype. Where do they go from there?
They relocated the whole operation to Mobile, Alabama, took the lessons learned, and started fresh.
Okay, on to submarine number 2.
The American Diver. They started building it in Mobile summer of 62. This one was meant to be more advanced, incorporating improvements.
Did they try a different power source this time? Hand cranking seems exhausting.
They did. The sources say they experimented, looked into early electromagnetic engines, even steam power, trying to get away from pure muscle.
Did any of that work?
Apparently not well enough. They ended up going back to the hand-cranked propeller. It worked even if it was slow. Reliability was probably key.
So, the American Diver gets launched.
January 1863. But yeah, still too slow to be effective against warships. And then just a month later, February 63, disaster strikes again.
What happened?
It sank. They were towing it across Mobile Bay, heading towards Fort Morgan for a planned attack run, and it just foundered in rough seas, went down.
Anyone hurt?
Fortunately, no. The crew got out before it sank. No lives lost that time.
Still, another major setback. 2 prototypes down, 1 scuttled, 1 lost at sea. Must have been incredibly disheartening.
You'd think so. But they kept going. It's after losing the American Diver that they start work on number 3, the final one, the one that would make history, the H.L. Hunley.
The Hunley, okay. When did they build this one?
Construction started in Mobile, early 1863, right after the Diver sank. And by July 63, it was ready for testing.
And this one was different. Better.
Oh, yeah. The sources describe it as a true marvel of 19th century engineering, a real testament to their ingenuity, what they learned from the failures, and just sheer resourcefulness. These Masonic brothers really pulled it off this time.
What made the Hunley such a step up? Give us the details.
Okay. Size-wise, about 40 feet long, maybe 4 feet across at its widest. Tight squeeze for the 8-man crew.
8 men. How did that work inside?
Well, 7 of them were purely the engine. They sat along a bench, turning this long crankshaft that ran down the middle, connected to the propeller at the back.
Wow. Just pure manpower.
Pure manpower. The 8th man was the commander up front, steering, managing the dive, firing the torpedo. The source credits James McClintock's engineering for refining that hand-crank system. Still slow, though. Speed was always the limitation.
Right. But the big challenge for early subs was getting down and, more importantly, getting back up reliably, wasn't it? Buoyancy control.
Absolutely. That was the thing that had stumped previous submarine designers, as the source puts it, a huge hurdle.
So how did the Hunley handle it? This is where Alexander came in.
Exactly. William Alexander, the British engineer with those old-world techniques, he was key in designing the ballast system. They had tanks inside the hull they could flood with water to sink.
And then pump the water out to surface.
Right. Using hand pumps. It sounds simple, but getting it right was complex. That system, plus movable fins on the outside called dive planes, allowed the Hunley to submerge and surface with, as the source says, relative ease, which was a massive breakthrough for the time.
Okay, so it could move, it could dive. What about the weapon? The torpedo?
That brings in Edgar Singer's expertise, the spar torpedo.
Describe that. Sounds pretty intimidating.
It was basically a copper cylinder packed with about 135 pounds of black powder, gunpowder.
Attached to the front.
Yeah, on a long pole about 22 feet long sticking out from the bow. The idea was you sneak up on the enemy ship.
Ram the pole into its side below the waterline.
Exactly, embed the charge, and then back off quickly and detonate it. Boom. Catastrophic damage was the goal.
Ingenious, but wow, incredibly dangerous. You're right next to the explosion.
Extremely risky. And the sources really emphasize the quality of the Hunley's construction itself. The hull wasn't just crude iron. It was rolled boilerplate, carefully shaped, riveted together for a hydrodynamic form, trying to make it slip through the water efficiently.
So every part, the hull shape, the ballast tanks, the pumps, the dive planes, it all reflected this careful thought and craftsmanship of its Masonic builders.
It was a sophisticated machine for its day, no doubt, born from that unique collaboration.
But getting it from built to battle-ready, that wasn't straightforward either, was it? The testing phase in Charleston, where they sent it next, the sources mention serious problems.
Yeah, numerous setbacks, each more disheartening than the last. That's how the source puts it. It was far from smooth sailing or smooth diving, I guess.
And these weren't just technical glitches. These were tragic setbacks.
Horrific costs, yeah. The sources detail 2 absolutely fatal accidents during testing in Charleston Harbor. Really underscores the danger these guys were facing.
The first one, August 29th, 1863. What happened?
Just devastating. The submarine dove, but somehow the hatches weren't properly secured. They were opened underwater. It flooded instantly.
Oh, God. How many lost?
5 crew members died in that accident, drowned inside.
Terrible. And that wasn't the only one.
No. Just a few weeks later, October 15th, 1863, an even bigger tragedy in a way. Horace Lawson Hunley himself.
The man whose vision started it all.
The very same. Apparently he was frustrated by the failures, really determined to prove the sub could work, so he insisted on commanding it himself for a demonstration dive in the harbor.
He took the helm.
He did. With a crew of 7 others, they submerged, and they just never came back up.
The whole crew, including Hunley.
All 8 men. Lost, including the project's namesake and driving force.
That must have been absolutely crushing, losing the leader after already losing crew before.
A crushing blow, personally, symbolically. The sources say after that second disaster, a lot of people wanted to just scrap the whole thing, said the Hunley was cursed, too dangerous.
You can understand why people would feel that way. It seems like maybe it was cursed.
Absolutely. But this is where the source brings it back to the character of the remaining team. That Masonic connection again.
How so?
Masons are taught to persevere in the face of adversity, the source says. Despite the grief, the setbacks, these guys, these brothers were determined. They believed the weapon was vital for the Confederacy. They weren't going to give up.
That shared bond, that commitment, it kept them going.
It seems so. It outweighed the urge to just walk away from this tragic project.
So who stepped up after Hunley was gone?
A young Mason named George E. Dixon. He'd been recently raised in Moriah Lodge No. 40. He brought engineering skills, but maybe more importantly, determination. He took charge in Charleston.
George Dixon.
Okay.
And the source mentioned something personal about him. A gold coin.
Yeah, a $20 gold piece. And the story behind it is incredible. Apparently, it saved his life during the Battle of Shiloh. Stopped a bullet.
Seriously?
Yeah.
A gold coin stopped a bullet.
That's the story. The source calls it his personal talisman and frames it as this tangible link between Masonic brotherhood and the fortunes of war. Like his survival was somehow tied to this project now, undertaken with his brothers.
Wow. And the source hints it plays a role later.
It does, a poignant one.
Okay, so Dixon takes over. They're driven by this perseverance, this fraternal bond. They press on. What's the situation now?
We're in early 1864. And things are looking even worse for the Confederacy.
The blockade's even tighter.
Tighter than ever. The war is clearly heading towards an endgame, and the South is on the back foot. If the Hunley, this secret Masonic weapon, was ever going to make a difference, it had to be now. Time was absolutely running out.
So the mission is finally on.
February 17th, 1864, a cold night. Lieutenant George Dixon and his 7 crewmen prepare to go out. The sources emphasize that they knew the danger. They also knew this was potentially historic. No sub had ever sunk an enemy ship in combat, ever.
Where did they go? What was the target?
They slipped out into Charleston Harbor, aiming for the USS Housatonic. Big ship, a 12,240-ton Union sloop of war, part of that blockading force.
Can you imagine being inside that sub? Cramped, dark.
Must have been incredibly tense, maybe just a single lantern lit. The only sounds, the rhythmic creak and splash of the crankshaft, the water sloshing in the bilge, maybe whispered commands.
Do you know what time they attacked?
Around 8:45 p.m. Lookouts on the Housatonic finally spotted something low in the water approaching them. But the source says it was too late.
The Hunley got too close.
Dixon rammed the spar torpedo right into the Housatonic's wooden hull after the mainmast.
And then?
The spar likely embedded itself. Then they triggered the charge, probably with a lanyard. The explosion ripped a massive hole in the Housatonic's side, below the waterline.
How quickly did it sink?
Just 5 minutes. The USS Housatonic went down in about 25 feet of water. The first warship ever sunk by a submarine.
History made, right there. The secret Masonic weapon, conceived in those lodge rooms, built through all that struggle. It actually worked. A huge, if maybe temporary, victory.
An extraordinary moment, but tragically, the victory was incredibly short-lived.
What happened to the Hunley?
Well, the sources say after the sinking, they signaled back to shore. A blue light, apparently the prearranged signal for success. Shore batteries even fired a shot to celebrate.
So they were okay initially?
It seems so, but then the Hunley and her crew just vanished, disappeared beneath the waves. Their fate became a complete mystery.
Gone, just like that.
Gone for over 130 years.
So the disappearance of the Hunley and its crew, that was the end of that chapter.
Right.
For a long, long time, the story was just this footnote, right? This experimental weapon, one brief success, then lost.
Pretty much. It was remembered, but mostly as a tragic failure in the bigger picture.
Until they found it.
1995, the wreck was located off Charleston. And then this massive effort. In 2000, they actually raised it, after 136 years sitting on the seabed.
Wow. And when they started excavating inside the raised sub, this is where the Masonic connection really comes back into focus, isn't it?
Incredibly powerfully, yeah. Archaeologists and conservators started finding things, not just tools or ship parts, but personal items, what the source calls tangible links to the Masonic brothers who died on that last mission.
What kind of things?
Deeply personal, really moving finds. One of the most significant was Lieutenant Dixon's gold watch, found right near where his remains were in the commander's station.
His watch, okay.
And attached to it was a watch fob. Not just any fob, it had the symbol of the Royal Arch.
Which is?
A higher degree within Freemasonry. The source notes it signifies a deeper commitment, a greater understanding of the fraternity's teachings. Finding that fob, it just spoke volumes about Dixon's dedication, something he carried with him, literally into the jaws of death.
That's incredible, a symbol of his bond right there at the end.
Exactly. And then the gold coin.
The Shiloh Life Preserver coin. They actually found it.
They actually found it. The $20 gold piece near Dixon's remains, just like the watch.
And was it really bent, like the story said?
Visibly bent, just as the legend described, distorted from stopping that bullet. And it even had that inscription confirming it. Shiloh, April 6, 1862, my life preserver GED.
Unbelievable. To find that after all those years, it confirms the whole story.
Must have been an absolutely stunning moment for the archaeologists. It takes it from romantic legend to documented reality. This tangible link between his survival at Shiloh, maybe fate, maybe providence, and his final mission on the Hunley adds such a layer of personal destiny, you know?
Yeah, wow. Were there other Masonic items found from the rest of the crew?
The sources mention other symbols, yeah. Etched or engraved on personal belongings. They give an example of a ring with the square encompasses that fundamental Masonic symbol. Found among the effects, though they don't know which specific crewman it belonged to.
So these weren't just random artifacts.
No, the sources call them silent testimonies. Testimonies to the shared bonds that united these men beyond their military duty. They were Confederate sailors, yes, but they were also brothers in this fraternity. And that bond was clearly important enough to carry into that cramped, dangerous space on that final mission.
It really underscores that the Brotherhood wasn't just the force that built the sub.
It was also a bond that sustained the men inside it, right to the end.
So when you pull it all together, the sources seem to argue that the Hunley story is much more than just military history or a tech experiment.
Yeah, it's more than just its design or its single victory or its tragic end. Their ultimate takeaway is really about how the whole saga demonstrates the true strength of Freemasonry.
How so? What's the core argument there?
It starts with one person, right? Horace Hunley, a Mason with this incredibly radical idea born out of wartime desperation.
And the Brotherhood, the network, was the key to making it happen.
Exactly. The sources say the Brotherhood United pulled together their best minds, finances, and men through that established, trusted network. They took this audacious vision and somehow made it real, pushing way beyond what anyone thought was possible back then.
And the conclusion the source draws from that?
It states pretty boldly that this story proves nothing is too big or impossible within the realm of Freemasonry. It's making a strong claim about the power of that fraternal bond, those shared values, to foster ingenuity, commitment, and achieve extraordinary things, even if, like the Hunley, they end in tragedy.
It really does make you think, doesn't it? About the hidden currents, the unseen networks that might be operating beneath the surface of big historical events, shaping things in ways we don't always see in the standard history books.
It's definitely a reminder that history isn't just about dates and battles and technology. It's fundamentally about people, their motivations, their skills, their connections.
And sometimes those connections, those bonds, are forged in surprising places, like the back room of a Masonic lodge.
Exactly. Quiet places where powerful ideas can take root.
It leaves you wondering about the depth of commitment that comes from those shared values, those oaths, and how these communities, maybe ones you don't often think about, can drive incredible innovation and perseverance even when the odds seem completely stacked against them.
A hidden layer to a well-known, tragic story.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the H.L. Hunley and its surprising and ultimately crucial connection to the Masonic Brotherhood. We really hope you found this look into the sources as fascinating and maybe as moving as we did.